Bright spring sunlight poured through the glass walls of the Holloway Conservatory, scattering across white stone terraces, flowering gardens, and the blue surface of Lake Michigan. Sailboats moved beyond the fountains, while Chicago's most influential families gathered to celebrate Claire Whitmore's engagement to Grant Holloway. Claire stood beside him beneath an arch of pale roses. She had built her career as an architectural conservator without inherited wealth, political connections, or a powerful surname. Yet the guests spoke of her success as though it were a charming detail, rather than something she had earned. Several praised her for being polished enough to enter the Holloway family, while quietly mocking her modest childhood and mixed heritage. Their compliments carried the cruelty of acceptance offered conditionally. Grant's relatives treated Claire as a useful addition to the family image, not as an equal. They admired her beauty, her education, and the public respect attached to her restoration work. But they discussed her background like a flaw requiring careful management. Margaret Holloway watched Claire with the clinical attention of someone evaluating an acquisition. Before the wedding, she intended to control which relatives appeared in photographs, which stories reached the press, and how much of Claire's past remained visible. Claire sensed a judgment but remained composed. After years of searching for her missing brother Noah, stability had begun to feel more valuable than romance. Grant represented security, influence, and access to people who might help reopen Noah's case. Claire did not realize that those same connections had already shaped the disappearance she was trying to solve. Above the celebration, behind tinted glass, Silas DeLuca watched in silence. For 4 years, he had loved Claire from a distance. She had unknowingly saved his younger sister Camille during a building fire, guiding her through smoke before emergency crews arrived. Silas discovered Claire's identity afterward, but never approached her. His criminal position would place danger around her immediately. Instead, he quietly removed threats from her path. He redirected men who followed her, blocked corrupt investigators from accessing her records, and watched without allowing her to know he existed. Silas believed distance was the only protection he could offer. Then Grant placed the engagement ring on Claire's hand. An old crest was engraved inside the band. Silas recognized it as a symbol of Meridian, a criminal coalition connected to blackmail archives, hidden property transfers, and Noah Whitmore's disappearance. His heartbreak became suspicion. Grant's security team photographed Claire's hand during the celebration, capturing her fingerprints under the pretense of documenting the ring. Camille's financial analysis confirmed that the engagement documents contained identity waivers and property transfer clauses unrelated to marriage. The Holloways did not simply want Claire. They needed legal access to something registered under the Whitmore family name. Silas ordered an investigation, but refused to approach her yet. Claire briefly looked toward the tinted balcony and noticed the outline of a broad-shouldered man behind the glass. Before she could focus, Margaret removed the original engagement contract and replaced it with another version. Silas finally understood that silence was no longer protecting Claire. As she left the conservatory, an anonymous message arrived on her phone, containing a photograph of Noah alive beside Grant Holloway only 3 days earlier. The photograph followed Claire from Chicago to the Delaware River. She drove east to her late father's wooden cabin in Pennsylvania, choosing the one place still untouched by the Holloway family's influence. The house stood beyond an old suspension bridge, surrounded by green forests, waterfalls, and steep riverbanks beneath gathering summer storm clouds. Inside, Claire studied the image again. Noah stood outside a redevelopment site, controlled by a Holloway subsidiary. He looked thinner and older, but the construction equipment behind him had been introduced only months earlier. The photograph could not have been taken before his disappearance. Her brother was alive. Claire contacted local law enforcement and requested that Noah's case be reopened. Instead of examining the image carefully, officials returned to his old record. A nonviolent arrest from years earlier was treated as evidence that he had chosen to disappear. Grant's family reputation required no proof. Noah's innocence apparently required perfection. Claire ended the call understanding something more frightening than institutional indifference. Truth was often measured by the wealth and influence of the person presenting it. The Holloways had political donors, attorneys, and respected public names. Noah had one damaged record, and a sister no one powerful feared disappointing. She searched through the cabin for anything her father might have hidden. Behind a framed architectural blueprint, Claire discovered a narrow compartment containing property documents, mineral surveys, and handwritten transfer records. The Whitmore family still owned mineral rights beneath several Holloway redevelopment sites. The engagement contract would transfer those rights to Grant after marriage. Claire's proposal had not been entirely romantic. It had been designed as a legal acquisition. Heavy rain struck the roof as she examined the final document. Through the window, movement appeared between the trees. Several armed men advanced toward the cabin. Before they reached the porch, another figure emerged from the storm. Claire recognized the broad-shouldered man from behind the conservatory glass. Silas DeLuca moved with controlled precision, disabling the intruders before they entered the house. He did not drag Claire outside or demand that she follow him. Instead, he placed identification cards and security credentials on the table. The men worked for a private protection company owned by Grant Holloway. Claire remained suspicious. Silas already knew the cabin, the engagement contract, and details about Noah that she had never shared. He revealed only that Noah had uncovered transactions connected to Meridian, a coalition protected by political offices, criminal families, and corporate foundations. Before he could explain further, the storm intensified. Floodwater damaged the suspension bridge, cutting off the main road. Silas opened an abandoned logging route through the forest, exposing a smuggling corridor his organization had protected for years. Claire watched him sacrifice valuable territory to keep her alive, but the gesture did not answer the most important question. Why had he been prepared for danger before she even knew it existed? They escaped through the storm toward a hidden mountain road. Inside Silas's vehicle, Claire found a sealed folder bearing her name. It contained 4 years of photographs proving he had been secretly watching and protecting her long before Grant ever proposed. By morning, the storm had retreated into the Catskill valleys, leaving the mountains covered in mist and bright sunlight. Silas brought Claire to a modern stone and timber house, surrounded by pine forests, waterfalls, and steep slopes descending toward the river. The property appeared peaceful. Armed guards, electronic gates, and surveillance cameras revealed that peace was being enforced. Claire entered the main study carrying the folder she found inside Silas's vehicle. The photographs documented 4 years of her life. They showed her restoring damaged buildings, waiting at train stations, visiting hospitals, meeting investigators, and searching neighborhoods connected to Noah's disappearance. Some had been taken from public streets. Others captured moments when Claire had believed she was alone. Silas did not deny collecting them. The surveillance began after Claire saved Camille during a building fire 4 years earlier. Silas learned her identity while investigating the incident and became emotionally attached from a distance. He believed approaching Claire would expose her to enemies who used personal relationships as weaknesses. Instead, he watched. He quietly redirected stalkers, blocked corrupt investigators from accessing her records, and stopped hired men before they reached her. Several photographs included written reports describing threats Claire had never known existed. She understood that his actions may have saved her life. That did not make them harmless. Protection became another form of control when one powerful person decided what another was allowed to know. Silas had chosen which dangers Claire could see, which truths she could handle, and how much freedom she could safely possess. Love did not become innocent merely because it remained silent. Silas unlocked every cabinet and gave Claire access to files, private routes, surveillance records, and security codes. He offered no defense and demanded no forgiveness. Camille arrived with a forensic analysis of the engagement contract. The agreement would transfer the Whitmore mineral rights to Grant and give the Holloways legal control over a buried data storage facility beneath one of the redevelopment sites. Noah had discovered that Meridian used abandoned industrial properties to conceal blackmail archives involving judges, corporations, criminal families, and political donors. Claire's marriage would turn the final Meridian site into Holloway property. Camille uncovered something worse. Silas's supposedly dead father had helped create Meridian alongside the Holloway family. The DeLuca organization had benefited from the same system Silas blamed entirely on Grant. His understanding of Noah's disappearance began to collapse. Silas immediately froze DeLuca accounts linked to Meridian. Several captains interpreted the decision as betrayal and began organizing against him. Claire's phone filled with news alerts. Grant had publicly announced their wedding date without her approval. Reports describe her absence as evidence of emotional instability caused by her working-class childhood. The Holloways were rewriting her identity before she could defend it. A drone struck the house moments later. Claire, Silas, and Camille escaped to a cliffside funicular railway as explosions damaged the upper structure. When a section of track failed, Camille slipped from the platform. Claire caught her and pulled her back before Silas could reach them. Before the mountain house lost power, a Meridian transmission appeared on the final screen. Noah was alive beneath a desert wedding venue owned by the Holloways. The transmission pulled Claire south into the New Mexico desert. Silas warned that Meridian would expect them, but Claire refused to leave Noah beneath another property controlled by the Holloways. By afternoon, they reached a private resort outside Santa Fe, surrounded by red cliffs, cactus gardens, white adobe buildings, and distant mountains glowing beneath brilliant sunlight. At the center stood a chapel prepared for Claire's wedding. Fresh flowers framed the entrance. Her name appeared on event schedules, property transfer documents, and biometric registration files, even though she had never approved the ceremony. The Holloways had not planned a celebration. They had prepared a legal extraction. Publicly, the resort was promoted as a destination wedding venue and rehabilitation center for vulnerable workers. Beneath the chapel, however, Claire found detention rooms, medical stations, and offices manufacturing false identities. Meridian imprisoned witnesses while rewriting their lives. Poor workers became suspected thieves. Immigrants received fabricated violations. Minority activists were assigned violent histories, while former employees were labeled unstable or dishonest. Their disappearances became believable because society had already been trained to distrust them. The network did not merely exploit prejudice. It depended on it. Claire discovered records showing Noah had attempted to expose the facility before his disappearance. Silas found transportation files bearing the names of DeLuca-owned companies. His organization had moved detainees between Meridian sites under ordinary commercial contracts. He had not authorized the operations personally, but Claire refused to treat ignorance as innocence. His empire had profited because powerful men rarely examined the suffering hidden beneath their wealth. They located Noah inside a secured medical chamber. He was thinner, physically weakened and visibly exhausted, but alive. Meridian had kept him because Claire's family controlled the last legal barrier protecting its central archive. Noah revealed that the network required Claire's signature, fingerprints, and inherited property rights. Grant's engagement had been designed to obtain all three through marriage. The ring, the contract, and the wedding were parts of the same operation. Their father had anticipated the threat years earlier. He concealed the archive's access sequence inside restoration measurements Claire learned during childhood. Proportions, structural intervals, and architectural patterns she believed were ordinary lessons were actually instructions for opening Meridian's final system. Grant needed Claire alive until the legal transfer was complete. Silas then admitted that his original interest in Claire had not begun entirely with love. After she saved Camille, he investigated her family because of its connection to Meridian. His feelings developed later, but the first surveillance had been strategic. The truth weakened Claire's trust, yet prevented another carefully protected lie. Alarms sounded before Noah could explain the full sequence. Grant's forces entered through the chapel, while Silas's rebellious captains attacked from the lower service corridors. They believed Meridian's survival mattered more than loyalty. Claire opened an ancient irrigation tunnel and led detained witnesses toward the desert cliffs. During the escape, Noah was separated and recaptured. Silas abandoned his chance to pursue Grant and stayed with Claire and the prisoners. Before Noah disappeared behind the closing security doors, he revealed that Meridian's central archive would be sold during Claire's public wedding aboard a luxury yacht in San Francisco Bay. The wedding yacht crossed San Francisco Bay beneath bright coastal daylight, moving between blue water, distant cliffs, and fog gathering around the Golden Gate Bridge. Grant had transformed the forced ceremony into a public charity event attended by judges, corporate executives, political donors, and organized crime leaders. Guests were told that Claire's absence resulted from emotional instability. A substitute bridal suite had already been prepared to control her clothing, movements, and public appearance once she was brought aboard. Claire entered through the service deck, disguised as part of the architectural event staff. Her plain identification badge made her nearly invisible. Powerful guests discussed erased investigations, protected accounts, and stolen identities, while workers move around them carrying documents and champagne. The buyers trusted that anyone serving them lacked the importance to understand what they were hearing. Claire photographed their faces and recorded conversations as she inspected the yacht's lower structural compartments. Silas watched from a distant deck. Every instinct urged him to remove Claire from danger and take control of the operation. Instead, he remained where she had instructed him to stay. Trust required more than protection. It required accepting that Claire had the right to choose risks he could not eliminate. Grant appeared before the guests and presented Noah as the architect of Meridian's crimes. Forged financial records, edited security footage, and fabricated medical reports transformed Noah from whistleblower into criminal conspirator. The audience accepted the evidence without hesitation because Grant's wealth gave the lie an appearance of authority. Claire understood how easily powerful institutions could replace an ordinary person's life with a more useful version. She reached the archive room beneath the main ballroom. The first security layer responded to the restoration measurements her father had taught her as a child. Claire entered structural ratios, material intervals, and architectural sequences until the system unlocked. The second layer required her engagement ring and biometric signature. Camille accessed the yacht's communications network and transmitted the guest list to independent journalists, civil rights investigators, and federal prosecutors beyond Meridian's control. Silas then entered the upper ballroom and revealed himself publicly. He froze every remaining DeLuca account connected to Meridian. His former captains attacked immediately, choosing the network that protected their wealth over the man they once followed. A dense fog bank rolled across the bay as a coastal storm struck the yacht. Grant reached the archive room and attempted to force Claire's hand onto the biometric reader. Instead, she inserted the engagement ring into the access port and used its Meridian crest to corrupt the system. The archive began destroying its own authentication records. Silas responded by shutting down his family's most profitable shipping network, preventing Grant support vessels from leaving the bay. During the chaos, Camille freed Noah from the security level. Grant escaped aboard a helicopter, carrying a partial copy of the archive. The recovered flight file revealed his destination, a private winter lodge where Silas's supposedly dead father was waiting to reclaim Meridian. The helicopter file led them into the mountains of Montana, where a private winter lodge stood between frozen lakes, pine forests, and snow-covered peaks beneath bright daylight. Evidence recovered from Grant's archive confirmed the impossible. Lorenzo DeLuca had survived the assassination Silas believed killed him years earlier. While Silas built his empire around revenge against the Holloways, his father had secretly controlled Meridian through offshore foundations, political intermediaries, and criminal alliances. The lodge hosted a private summit for wealthy donors and influential officials. Publicly, they had gathered to fund regional charities. Behind secure doors, Meridian's surviving ownership was being transferred. Claire, Silas, Camille, and Noah entered the property through separate routes. Lorenzo received Silas inside a glass hall overlooking the frozen lake. He showed no relief at seeing his son. He regarded Silas as a disappointing successor who had weakened the family by placing human lives above criminal power. His contempt sharpened when Claire entered. Lorenzo viewed her modest upbringing and mixed heritage as threats to the DeLuca legacy. He described exclusion as tradition and prejudice as protection, using family honor to disguise a hierarchy that had always decided which people deserved dignity. Silas finally understood that loyalty inside his family had never been unconditional. It existed only while he protected the system. Claire refused to become a reward in a conflict between father and son. She had not crossed prisons, storms, and criminal territories to be claimed by whichever man won. Her priorities remained restoring Meridian's victims and clearing Noah's name. Noah accessed the lodge records and uncovered proof that Lorenzo had arranged his imprisonment. Grant's engagement plan had also been designed by Lorenzo, who needed Claire's legal rights and biometric access to recover Meridian's final archive. Grant had believed he would inherit the network. Lorenzo intended to erase him once the transfer was complete. Camille entered the lodge's financial system and redirected stolen assets into independent restitution accounts controlled by Meridian's victims. Lorenzo responded by ordering Silas's remaining soldiers to choose between their boss and the DeLuca Empire, most abandoned Silas. He then surrendered access to his surveillance network, private routes, offshore funds, aircraft records, and intelligence files. The decision destroyed the tools he had once used to monitor Claire without permission. For the first time, loving her meant giving up the power to find her. Grant discovered Lorenzo's plan to eliminate him, and the alliance began collapsing from within. An avalanche warning forced guests toward emergency exits. As snow damaged the mountain roads, Claire and Noah guided trap staff through an ice tunnel hidden behind a glacier-fed waterfall. Silas confronted Lorenzo near the lodge's transport garage, but refused to kill him. Revenge would silence one criminal. Public exposure could destroy every official who had protected Meridian. Lorenzo escaped with the archive aboard a snow vehicle, and Grant followed, determined to seize it for himself. The vehicle's signal led toward an abandoned federal installation buried beneath a forest in the Pacific Northwest. The archive signal led Claire's group deep into Washington state, through flooded roads and ancient cedar forests veiled by mountain fog. Waterfalls spilled beside the narrow route, while bright post-storm daylight reflected from broken branches and standing water. At the center of the forest stood an abandoned federal installation. Public records identified it as a closed environmental research center. Beneath its weathered laboratories, Meridian maintained a government access point that had protected the network for decades. From that facility, officials altered court files, medical histories, immigration records, police databases, and financial accounts. Judges, agencies, and corporations had not simply failed to stop Meridian. They had helped design it. Lorenzo intended to erase every surviving witness, destroy the remaining DeLuca and Holloway records, and rebuild Meridian under a new name. Grant discovered that his own identity was scheduled for deletion once the transfer finished. Realizing he had never been Lorenzo's successor, he turned against him. Silas's former captains divided between the two men. Their struggle for control spread through the compound, forcing Meridian's criminal factions to attack one another. While the armed groups fought, Claire and Noah reached the central archive. Their father's restoration code opened the first security layer. Measurements Claire had learned as a child, structural ratios, material intervals, and preservation sequences, became commands inside Meridian's system. She finally understood that the architectural lessons she remembered as family traditions had been designed as a survival mechanism. Camille entered the restoration network and began recovering stolen assets and erased identities. False criminal records disappeared. Medical histories returned. Frozen accounts reopened, and missing witnesses became visible again to the institutions that had once abandoned them. In a separate surveillance chamber, Silas destroyed every DeLuca tracker, hidden route, private camera, and file ever collected on Claire. When the archive collapsed, he would permanently lose the ability to locate her without permission. Claire understood the significance of his decision. She did not mistake it for automatic forgiveness. Grant reached the archive wing and attempted to use Claire's leverage against Silas. Instead of abandoning her plan or acting from possessiveness, Silas followed her instructions and blocked the exits while Noah transmitted Meridian's complete archive to federal courts, journalists, civil rights organizations, and international investigators. Lorenzo ordered the facility flooded. Water broke through the lower corridors, rising around the archive chambers. Claire led trapped witnesses across elevated maintenance bridges, while Camille continued the restoration process. Grant exposed Lorenzo's plan to eliminate both criminal families. Their soldiers turned against one another as the compound collapsed around them. Silas prevented his remaining men from executing either Lorenzo or Grant. Public trials would expose Meridian's institutional protection more effectively than revenge. Federal teams arrived as the system failed. Lorenzo and Grant were arrested. Claire's legal identity, Noah's reputation, and hundreds of stolen records were restored. After the arrests, Claire disappeared without telling Silas where she'd gone, leaving behind only a photograph of a lighthouse beside a stormy ocean. Several months passed after Meridian collapsed. Claire settled along the Maine coast, where a restored lighthouse overlooked rocky beaches, pine-covered cliffs, wildflowers, and the bright Atlantic. Ocean mist moved across the property each morning, while she transformed an abandoned workshop into a restoration center for people whose identities Meridian had stolen. The survivors arrived carrying damaged records, unfinished legal cases, and years of distrust. Claire helped them rebuild more than documents. She gave them a place where they were treated as individuals rather than evidence inside someone else's investigation. Former Meridian properties became clinics, shelters, legal centers, and worker-owned businesses. Noah assisted federal investigators while rebuilding a life outside the criminal history created under his name. Camille managed a restitution foundation completely independent of the DeLuca organization. Silas remained away. He cooperated with investigators, surrendered financial records, and testified against former captains, judges, corporate executives, and officials who had protected Meridian. He accepted responsibility for crimes committed under his leadership, even when he had not personally approved them. The lighthouse photograph Claire left behind remained on his desk. Silas still possessed contacts who could have traced the coastline, searched financial records, or followed property transfers. He refused to use them. Destroying Meridian would mean nothing if he continued using power to enter Claire's life without permission. Months later, she contacted him through an independent attorney. Silas traveled to Maine alone. He brought no guards, weapons, gifts, or demands. When he reached the lighthouse, he remained outside the property until Claire chose to meet him near the cliffs. She did not offer immediate forgiveness. Claire made him confront the truth that his silent love had become dangerous long before Grant's engagement. Silas had believed that removing threats, controlling information, and watching from a distance gave him the right to decide what she could safely know. Protection without consent had still been control. Love without freedom was another form of domination. Claire acknowledged that Silas had destroyed the surveillance network and criminal structure that once gave him power over her. She also refused to treat sacrifice as automatic redemption. Any future relationship would exist under conditions she established. Claire would retain her own home, career, finances, privacy, and authority over Survivor Foundation. Silas would receive no access to her location, records, or decisions without direct permission. He accepted a place beside her rather than ownership over her. Their relationship began slowly and privately. Claire later restored an old coastal ballroom and attended its reopening beneath bright Atlantic daylight. Silas watched from a seat she had personally invited him to occupy, not from a hidden balcony or private room. For the first time, his presence belonged to her choice. The emotional cycle appeared complete until Noah developed the final photographs recovered from Meridian. One image showed Claire years before Grant proposed. Judge Everett Hale, now leading the federal prosecution, stood in the background watching her. Silas's silence had not started the war. Someone inside the government had been preparing Claire's engagement long before Grant placed the ring on her hand.